Essentially a grown-up version of the Mini, the Austin Maxi is a car that took many great opportunities to be a market leader in Britain and Europe, including a spacious 5-door hatchback body and 5-speed gearbox, and missed them once again due to a catalogue of management decisions and a desperate need to get the machine into sales at the first opportunity. What resulted was a car that was described as already looking 10 years old when it was launched, while the continued interference of the British Leyland executive staff ensured that this somewhat underperforming car would remain a fixture on the market throughout the entire of the 1970s, regardless of the fact that it was being rapidly swamped by far younger competition. The Austin Maxi arose from a desperate need by British Leyland to replace the aging pre-merger Farina designs of 1958, which were among the earliest mass-production hatchbacks on the UK market, and while these cars were innovative and stylish for their time, they had failed to evolve sufficiently to meet the ever-changing customer needs. Originally, the plan had been for the ADO 17 range of family cars, affectionately dubbed the Land Crab, to fill the role of the Farina models, but upon its launch was lambasted due to its outsized dimensions being too big for the small family car bracket, while looking bigger than it actually was, meant, in practice, it was too small for the large family car sector, thus causing it to fall into a hole in the market. The result was the ADO 17 struggling to sell, thereby forcing British Leyland's predecessor, the British Motor Corporation or BMC, to consider the creation of a new model that would sit between the smaller ADO 16 and the larger ADO 17, the first mutterings of what would become the ADO 14 being made during mid-1965, and would comprise a wheelbase of exactly 100 inches, or around 3/8 of the way between the smaller and larger models already available. Disagreement soon arose, though, due to the insistence of fitting the car with the ADO 17's doors, which were so large that they pushed the wheelbase of the ADO 14 to 106 inches, once again knocking it out of favour with the market it wished to serve, while more severely, it also meant all Austin-badged cars between 1.5 and 3 litres would feature similarly styled centre sections. In response, Sir Alec Issigonis, the designer of the Mini and BMC's technical director, developed a new cell of engineers, led by Assistant Chief Engineer for Engines and Transmissions, Eric Bareham, to push forward the ADO 14 project, the car adopting a new engine in the range of 1.3 to 1.5 litres. The possibility of reusing existing engines, such as the A-series power plant from the Mini, had been ruled out due to the capabilities and displacement of that unit being pushed to their limits with the 1.3-litre Mini Cooper, with Issigonis developing a cutting-edge design which featured an overhead camshaft and plenty of upgrade potential. With the proposed new engine and its overhead camshaft configuration, enthusiasm for the ADO 14 project was booming, and with forecast sales of 6,000 units per week, a new engine plant was to be constructed at Cofton Hackett, approximately 2 miles south of Austin's main plant at Longbridge, the location of which would be able to supply the assembly lines with a near-constant supply of power plants. However, the new engine, now dubbed the E-Series, had several endemic flaws, Issigonis deciding that upper-range E-Series engines should have an extra pair of cylinders, rather than the usual convention of increased engine capacity, but this required that the power unit be ultra-compact in order to fit transversely into the engine bays of BMC's front-wheel drive range, and while a compact engine had its advantages, the 4-cylinder version was physically limited to a maximum displacement of 1.5 litres. Initially, BMC proposed 4 versions of the engine for the ADO 14, a 1.2, 1.3 and 1.5-litre version of the 4-cylinder and a 2.2-litre version of the 6-cylinder, but this was cut down to merely the 1.5 and 2.2 engines by BMC's engineers, all while the new Cofton Hackett plant was constructed at a cost of £14 million for the machinery alone, or £277 million in 2023. This illustrated a massive investment by the wider BMC firm upon the plant's opening in October 1967, with BMC management boasting that the plant was the most advanced facility in the modern automotive industry, employing 1,100 workers, hosting 5 assembly tracks with transfer bar conveyor systems, so that major components could be fed directly by an overhead conveyor from the machining area, and a semi-automatic assembly of cylinder heads. Aside from the engine, the ADO 14 itself would be the highlight of BMC's technological capabilities, the decision to introduce both a 5-speed gearbox and a cavernous interior with a hatchback being a rare mixture of performance and practicality within a family car, the prospective model being lauded as a potential replacement for the Renault 16 of similar proportions, which had been released in 1965. The 5-speed gearbox was a particular note, as it eliminated the previous overdrive found on 4-speed contemporaries, thus allowing for a more comfortable motorway cruising experience. It wasn't all positive with the project though, as the car was still being lumbered with the oversized doors of the Land Crab, which made it impossible to reduce the car's dimensions any further than they already had been, while in order to make the somewhat ungainly appearance of the car more attractive, ex-Ford design director Roy Haynes was brought in to give the model a cosmetic overhaul. Upon his arrival, he introduced a grille reminiscent of the Mark II Ford Cortina, together with circular headlights, although no comprehensive modifications to the car's aesthetics could be undertaken, as Press Steel, the company which supplied BMC with body panels and shells, had already been given the go-ahead to start building body presses. In 1968, as development of the ADO-14 neared its end, BMC merged with the Leyland Group to form British Leyland, and under the control of the conglomerate's first chairman, Lord Stokes, who had previously held a commanding position at Triumph, he placed a greater emphasis on the development and future success of his own Triumph brand, followed closely by the more prominent aspects of the BL firm, including Jaguar and Rover. Austin and Morris, meanwhile, which built the company's mass-production family cars, were shunted into the Austin Morris division of British Leyland, but in so doing would lose much of their investment as they were pushed down the priority list. This was reflected during the final months leading up to the launch of the ADO-14, which had now been christened the Austin Maxi, as Isagonis, who had led the project from its inception, was pushed aside by Triumph engineer Harry Webster, who identified a plethora of faults with the car, including its lackluster cable-operated gearbox and the fact that the 1.4-litre E-Series engine would be unable to get the heavy Maxi moving. This demanded the rapid development of a 1.7-litre power unit, and thus pushing back the car's entry into production by another year to 1969, thus adding an extra £1 million cost to the car's development programme. Stokes was therefore left in a bind, as with there still being so many outstanding problems with the Maxi's design, and his strategists telling him that the project would only reap 4% of the UK's car market, he considered that the Maxi should be dropped and investment made instead into an entirely different car. However, this proposal was hamstrung by the £14 million investment made in the new Cofton-Hackett engine facility, a heavy cost that needed to be paid. Therefore, he reluctantly gave his approval to get the model put into production, and the car entered sales in April 1969. Following its official release at an event in Estoril, Portugal, the response to the Austin Maxi was lukewarm at best, the car being considered unimpressively bland, underpowered, heavy to steer, and irritating to drive, thanks to the cable-operated 5-speed gearbox, while the design of the car was clearly the product of early 1960s thinking, and was considered a decade out of date by the time of its launch. The only positives garnered for the car were its spacious interior and incredible practicality, thanks to the hatchback, and when fifth gear could be found, it was a quiet and smooth motorway cruiser as promised. In truth, the car's flaws came down to just 3 bones of contention: a lack of power from the E-Series engine, the poor gearbox, and the somewhat underwhelming styling, criticisms which could have easily been overcome with a rolling improvement to the model, but due to the initial reception of the car being largely ambivalent, British Leyland opted instead to distance themselves from the model and lay blame for its shortcomings on the previous BMC design team, essentially abandoning the Maxi to its fate. The Austin Maxi would therefore remain in the market as British Leyland's unloved child, being greeted with total apathy from the British car-buying public due to its fixed 5-door hatchback design that illustrated no flexibility, with rivals like the Ford Cortina presenting a range of options, including saloons and estate cars, with different engines for varying performance, the Maxi set firmly with its ill-conceived 5-speed gearbox and the limitations of the E-Series engine. Then came British Leyland's slew of industrial relations problems, a series of stoppages at the Press Steel Fisher plant in Cowley, which supplied the Maxi body shells, meaning the assembly lines were starved of supplies and unable to fill the waiting lists for what few prospective buyers wished to procure the model. In terms of production rates for the car, meanwhile, from its original proposal of a much more reasonable 2,000 units per week, This was dropped in stages to 1,800, 1,600, and then finally 1,300 by 1970. Even before the end of 1969, the inability of the Maxi to sell meant it was already being slated for discontinuation, but instead of ending the car after only a few months, British Leyland opted for a full relaunch of the model, with the many lingering faults resolved, and from the autumn of that year, modified Maxis began to make their way down the production line. Showroom salesmen, distributors, and dealers were given retraining and financial incentives to put more than 1,500 demonstrators on the road in order to woo potential Maxi buyers, while the retail price of the car, in spite of a general rising cost for its rivals, was frozen at £1,018, or £17,100 in 2023, making it far more competitive, though reducing the potential profit margins against assembly costs. The modified Maxi worked wonders, and from its original market penetration of only 1.5%, this increased month over month to 2.2, 2.5, and finally over 3% in April 1970, and by May the cost for repairs under warranty for the car were the lowest of any BL model, although the output was still struggling to meet the forecast production targets. In October 1970, a 1.75-litre E-Series version of the Maxi was introduced with a new rod-operated gear change, although many endemic flaws, such as the strange styling and heavy steering, continued to pervade. Sadly, while the revised Maxi was the car that should have been released initially, the premature and botched launch of the original Maxi, with so many flaws, meant the car's reputation was tarnished for good, and with public opinion still being generally unfavourable, the British Leyland management washed their hands of it once the various rectifications had been made, with improvements to the overall design only being provided by private engineers and tuning specialists for an additional cost. In 1977, the Austin title was dropped in favour of the car being simply called the Maxi, followed a year later by the model being reworked to replace its hydroelastic suspension with the hydrogas system implemented on the Allegro and the Leyland Princess, thereby presenting commonality among British Leyland's range of Austin family saloons. However, the only major change to the general appearance of the car came with a facelift in 1980, which included new bumpers, wheel trims, and interior, although regardless of the unenthusiastic and infrequent amendments made by the BL management, the model continued to be a background source of income for the company, selling a steady 20,000 to 30,000 units per annum over the course of the decade. While the Maxi's main appeal was simple, efficient, and cheap motoring for low-income families, what British Leyland had failed to grasp was that the car could have potentially been a precursor to the later trend for people carriers during the mid-1980s, in which a spacious, practical body was put onto the chassis of a regular car in order to provide the dimensions and driving characteristics of a saloon, but with the interior capacity for both passengers and goods of a van or minibus. Instead, the model was pushed aside and swept beneath more prominent models like the Allegro and the Princess, a disowned carryover from British Leyland's pre-merger era that stumbled along in isolation until 1981, when, following the impending launch of the Austin Maestro, and with front-wheel drive saloon and estate cars such as the Vauxhall Cavalier Mark II rewriting the marketplace for family motoring, the Maxi's archaic looks and sluggish performance was rendered starkly out of place. In July of that year, the last example rolled off the production line after a run of 11 years and 472,098 units, its place at the Cowley plant being taken over by the new face of British Leyland and the car which would begin the company's reversal of fortunes, the understated Honda-based Triumph Acclaim. To summarise, the Maxi, like so many British Leyland cars, was another example of opportunity missed, but concurrently was a victim of the time it was produced, as the concept of delivering a family car with such innovations as a spacious 5-door hatchback design and a 5-speed gearbox was one the buying public, steeped in traditional views as to motoring aesthetics, struggled to grasp. This was in contrast to the fact that only a decade later, such a simple but cutting-edge design would be considered avant-garde, as the Renault Espace launched the era of modern people carriers and in so doing created a motoring sensation. Despite the skepticism of the customers, though, the Maxi's story is one that was bungled from start to finish, being rushed to its launch before all the faults had been ironed out and then ignored for the remainder of its production run, while the management put the blame of its misgivings on their BMC progenitors, all while overlooking the potential gold mine the Maxi's practical design had to offer, which, with a little modification, could have easily been changed to suit the needs of the ever-evolving car market.